You heard them. The very first thing they said they miss about being in these times is friends, right? It's pretty amazing, isn't it? You think about whether it's young boys like that, or people in the stages of life that most of us are in, or old people in the nursing home. I mean, what do we miss the most? Being able to be together with each other the way we used to be together, laughing, shaking hands, hugging, playing games, eating together, just all those things. And so, friends, yeah, it's hard to have to live the way we're living during this difficult time. For a long time, I thought we kind of get it wrong at Advent. Advent's always been a season of waiting. And when we start talking about waiting, it's kind of like we're waiting for Jesus to be born, to celebrate that birth, etc., etc. And while we do that, the really good news for Christians and all of God's people is we don't have to wait. The good news is God is with us, and God has always been with us. And if it feels like God's not with us, it's not because God isn't. God is. It's our problem, and we just don't feel that way. And so, I don't know how we would change, the way we deal with Advent, because when you look at the text we use, the Old Testament, the New Testament, and when you look at a lot of our lives, right where we're at right now, we've been dealing with the virus for 8 months, right? What are we waiting for? Well, we're waiting for the vaccine to get out. We're hoping the vaccine's going to do a really good job, and we can get back to normal and be together again, right? So we're waiting for that, and there are always hard things that we have to wait through. But the good news is that even while we're waiting, and it doesn't make a difference what we're awaiting, God is with us in that waiting to bless us with those most important gifts we need. With faith, which is trust in God's presence and our love and care for each other. With hope that things will get better. And most importantly, in between, what do? We love each other, right? And yeah, it's hard to love each other during these hard times. But that's what we're called to do, love each other with a Christ-like love. It certainly sounds like Jesus is talking about the end of the world in today's gospel. In those days, after that suffering, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will be falling from heaven, and the powers in the heavens will be shaken. It sounds like a cosmic disaster that will lead to the end of everything. There were Christians in those days who thought Jesus was talking about the end and that it would come within a generation. Obviously, it did not. Others believed he was talking about the destruction of Jerusalem, which did happen, or the deaths of many of his followers, which also happened. The end did come for many people. The end has always fascinated many people and scared others. You've been reading some books about the end, haven't you, Caleb?
What?
You've been reading some books about the end, haven't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, it gets scary.
And a lot of people read those books.
Yep.
And a lot of people are fascinated, and a lot of people are scared, too.
Yes.
It might seem kind of strange for a preacher to not be concerned about the end. After all, there are many people who believe the church's primary concern is with the end of our lives and the end of everything else. I was talking to a young man here a few weeks ago, and he said, wow, I said to him, wow, you've got a really tough job now with this virus. And normally his job is really challenging and demanding anyway, has a lot of responsibility, but with the virus, it's like really hard. And he looked at me and said, I'm happy I've got my job and not yours. And I said, why? And he said, wow, I wouldn't want to have the job of getting people into heaven after they're dead. Look at the way people are. And I looked at him and I said, I'm thankful that's not my job either. That's God's job. And I'm confident God is going to take care of all of us at the end. My job is to proclaim the good news that God is with us now, loving and caring for us, blessing us with all we need for abundant lives. And I said, that's a great job to be able to have that job, to proclaim that good news of God's presence and God's love. My attitude about the end has always been that the end will most certainly come for us as individuals, and probably someday for all of us as humanity. But there's not much we can probably do about it, other than hasten its coming. So why waste valuable time thinking about our ends or the end of all of it? I trust that when the end comes for me and all of us, God will be there, and God's will be done, whether it's for me as an individual or for all of us together. If you ask me what I think God will do with us, all I can say is, and you've heard me say this before, I have no idea and don't believe I ever will have an idea of what happens on the other side of death. I'm just not concerned with it. I don't think I can do anything about it, and so I put it in God's hands and trust that God will take care of it. That's it. What I'm far more concerned with is the way I live. Now there's something I can do something about. The way I live. Well, maybe not much, because we all are kind of the way we are. But hopefully, something. Twice in today's gospel, Jesus says, keep awake. Jesus tells us to keep awake at the beginning of verse 35, and again at the end of verse 37. What do you think Jesus means when he says, keep awake? There are some who believe Jesus is telling us to watch for his coming at the end of time, his return to judge us and separate the sheep from the goats. We had that gospel last Sunday. Maybe they're right. I don't know. That really doesn't ring true for me. How does it sound to you? Still, others believe it refers to our individual deaths. In the time it takes me to preach this sermon this morning, almost 1,300 people in the world will die. That's amazing, isn't it? And that's not because of COVID. That many people, die in the period of time it's going to take me to preach this sermon all the time. No, the sermon's not going to be that long. But almost 150,000 people in the world die every day. That's a lot of people, isn't it? When you look at the births, however, we're still staying ahead of that death rate. So what does Jesus mean when he says keep awake? Well, I can't speak for Jesus. Here's what it sounds like to me from reading when Jesus talks about other times where we need to be awake. If you pay attention to Jesus, it seems that there are two things that were very important to him. First, he stayed aware of God's presence in his life and worked very hard at understanding what God's will was for him. He worshiped, prayed, and listened for what God wanted of him. Sometimes when he got distracted by his friends and all the people who were around him, he'd go away to a quiet place by himself, up a mountain, out on the sea, just to get away, a garden, to stop and focus on what God was really calling him to be and to do. Sometimes we need to do that, just get away from all the noise, even the noise inside our heads, to listen clearly to what God is calling us to be and to do. Second, Jesus paid attention to the people around him and seized every opportunity he could to reach out and love and care for others. Do you remember the story where the woman who had been bleeding for 12 years thought she would be made well if she could just sneak up and touch the hem of Jesus' robe? I don't know how Jesus noticed or why he cared about something as insignificant as a woman crawling up and touching the fringe of his robe, but Jesus did. And he immediately turned and seeing her said, "Take heart, daughter." I mean, he sensed immediately where she was at. 12 years of bleeding. Can you imagine that? Take heart, daughter. Your faith has made you well. Your trust in me. Your trust in God. I'm not aware of a single time in the Gospels when Jesus has an opportunity to touch someone's life that he fails to do so. Maybe when Jesus tells us to keep awake, he's telling us to live the way he did. To be as aware of God's presence in our lives and will for us as we can. God is with us all the time. That's the central promise of the Bible. Do not be afraid. I'm with you. I love you. I care for you. I'll never let you go. Oh, come, Emmanuel. Emmanuel, God is with us right now. So Jesus calls us to be aware of God's presence in our lives and our will for us. And then he calls us to reach out and love and care for others in his name. That makes sense to me. How about you? Keep awake. Open your eyes to God's presence in your life. Open your eyes to the people who need your love and care. Reach out to them in my name. Maybe the coming of the Son of Man in clouds of great power and glory refers to the many ways in which Christ came to his friends after his death and continues to come to us through his word, through the sacraments, through the love and care of each other, through those mysterious, powerful ways we often experience Christ in our lives. And maybe his sending out the angels to gather his elect from the four winds, from the ends of the earth to the ends of heaven, refers to the love and care he's called us to have for all his people, for us to gather all people from the four winds, from the ends of the earth, and bring them together to worship him and love and care for each other. Last week at the final judgment, when those being judged asked Jesus, "When did we see you, Lord?" Do you remember what Jesus' answer was? "You saw me in the hungry, thirsty, strangers, poor, sick, prisoners, and anyone else who needed loved and cared for." Jesus reminds us that if we want to love him, the way to do so is by loving the least among us. The hungry, thirsty, strangers, poor, sick, prisoners, and anyone else who needs to be loved and cared for. Jesus warns us that hard times are coming. Hard times always come, don't they? To us as individuals and us as humanity. Keep awake. We've been dealing with some very hard times the past 8 months, and it looks like those hard times are going to be around for a while yet. Hard times come in the ways we often feel, conflicts in our relationships, not enough money, illness, and death. They come as many of the seemingly insurmountable issues that always seem to be before us as a nation and a global community. They come as global and cosmic disasters. There's nothing we can do to keep the hard times from coming. They've always come, and they always will come until we're all gone. The best we can do is to keep awake, to live the way Jesus did, to be aware of God's presence in our lives and will for us, to seize every opportunity we can to reach out, to love and care for others. That may not keep the hard times or end from coming, but it can create a world filled with love, peace, joy, and hope for as long as we're here. I hope all of you are aware of God's presence in your life, not just during hard times, but all the time. I also hope your hearts are filled with love and care, not just for your family and friends, but for all of God's people, and especially the least among us. If you follow Jesus, is there anything else that really matters? Keep awake, trust God is with you, love and care for others. Amen.